Alright, so this is a subject I've actually planned to do a video on for quite some time, and I actually saw a video the other day that kind of brought this subject back up to my head, so I figured now is probably the perfect time to do this video. And we're going to talk about, based on my personal experience, proper spotting scope setup. So as a spotter, how do you set your spotting scope up to be able to give this person you're spotting for, the shooter, the most useful feedback? Because that's what we're doing as a spotter. We are there to be able to give useful feedback to a shooter who may not have as clear a picture as you do as the spotter. First off, I planned to do this video, start this video about an hour ago when it wasn't raining. Got everything set up, came out, and it just started raining, so we're doing it in the rain anyway. So, anyway, actually most matches that I go to, I see shooters and spotters, people spotting for other shooters, and almost never do I see somebody spotting that is set up for success. So, or spotting in a way that's actually going to give useful feedback to the shooter. First off, you almost always see people setting up their spotting scope to the side of a shooter. This is basically useless at any distance inside of probably 1,500 yards to give accurate feedback. And now, I mean, I'm talking 5-6 feet off to the right or left-hand side of a shooter. And why is that? Because you're not getting the same picture as the shooter. So if I'm a shooter and I've got somebody spotting for me and I'm shooting 1,000 yards, and this person that's spotting to the right of me, as the shooter, I see splash that looks like it was a half minute off the right edge of the plate. But my spotter, who is to the right of me, says that that shot went a quarter minute off the, or just barely off the left edge of plate. That half minute, you know, just barely missed the plate. I'm going to trust what I saw over the person that's 6 feet to the right of me, because they don't have a correct angle of what I'm seeing. They're not seeing the actual trajectory and angle of your bullet. And I know what you're thinking, 1,000 yards, that's a long way, and two people this close together, 6 feet apart, as you get close, as you go further out, that angle gets smaller and smaller. But I promise you, it is enough to throw off an accurate read with your spotting scope, even at 1,000 yards. When you get on beyond 1,500 yards, out to a mile, those distances, you can kind of get away with not being set up behind the shooter. And there's another reason that it's not so pertinent at those distances as well, because you're not going to worry about spotting trace. So another big thing about why you don't want to set up to the side of your shooter is, if we're shooting inside of 1,000 yards, most cartridges that we shoot are going to still be supersonic to that 1,000 yards. So you're going to be able to catch bullet trace from the time it leaves the barrel all the way to the target if you set up behind the shooter and not to the side of the shooter. Now you can, I'm not saying that you won't catch trace if you lay to the side of the shooter, if you set up to the side of the shooter, but catching that trace, first off, you'll probably catch a very small amount of trace if you're off to the side. And just like the trajectory from being lined up behind a shooter instead of to the side of a shooter, that trajectory, you're going to see a slightly altered trajectory. So, matter of fact, a little bit of backstory on this. I was at a match, it was actually a pretty big match a while back, and any of you guys that ever shot matches, you know when you get down to the end of the day, there's always a few shooters left. So I was just finishing up, just packed up all my stuff, and as I pack up my stuff, one of the last guys to shoot was shooting. Now, I had just shot my last string of the day, and I had watched, and we were shooting in a pretty stout wind, about a 12 mile an hour, that was really switchy, but it was doing a slow switch. And I noticed through my last string, I had a huge windage correction from the first shot to the last shot. It kept going further and further and further to the right. And I was watching the wind flags going from about a third value all the way to full value. Well, there was a guy that was shooting right after me on the next line over, the next target, and I see him lay down, and he had just shot his match probably an hour and a half before that, when the wind was still at that third value. So he shoots, and he'd actually had a really good score up to this point. So this was really kind of devastating to him. He laid down to shoot, and I said before he shot, I said, "Hey guys, that wind has just switched to full value," and that's all I said. And then he shoots a shot. Obviously these were siders, so it wasn't a big deal. But this was a match where you only got, I think, 4 siders. And then, or no, it was 2-siders. Last match of the day, so he had 2-siders, and then he had to start shooting for score. So he shoots his 2-siders, and I knew what was happening because the last match, I shoot in a lot of wind all the time because I know how lucky I am that I have the availability to shoot in this massive piece of property that you guys see me shoot in. And when you don't have when you're not often shooting in switching winds like that, it's really hard to pick up on a huge wind change, especially at 12 mile an hour from a third value to a full value. That's depending on what cartridge. And this guy was shooting FTR, so he was shooting a 308, I think 220X. I know this is a long drawn out story, but this is to relay a point. And after his second sider, which was not on target, I said it again. I said that wind switched from half to full value. Well, he had a guy spotting for him, lined up 5 feet to the right of him, and the guy couldn't, he said, okay, we're going for score. You know, I've shot my 2-siders. Goes to shoot his first shot for score. Of course, I knew where it went. It went off the right side of the target completely. You know, it's at 308, even a 220X bullet that I'm sure he was shooting. That wind's moving it a long way at 12 mile an hour. So anyway, after his third shot for score in a row, 5 shots now, from a guy that had a really good score up to this point during the day, 5 shots in now, his next shot goes off edge. So this guy's just dropped 30 points of a possible 200-point match. So I said to him, and the guy next to him sitting there trying to spot, says, well, I'm not seeing anything. I'm not catching trace. I'm sitting there thinking in my, self, banging my head. And so I said, hey, I grabbed the bolt. I was just getting ready to put my rifle in the case. I grabbed the bolt out of my rifle and I hand it to the guy that's shooting. I said, this was probably not something I wasn't supposed to do, but I knew that the way they had the spotting scope set up, they weren't going to catch trace. So I laid down just to the side of him and behind him about 10 feet. And I said, all right, fire one. I said, do me a favor, put 2 minutes to the left on it. He did, reluctantly, and shot his shot, and boom, he was a minute and a half off of, I think, the 10 ring, off the edge of the 10 ring. And so, and I told him, I said, I saw him shoot. I said, man, you were just outside you were just outside the 8 ring. And boom, shows up on the shot spotter. There it is, just outside the 8 ring. So boom, there you go. And by me lining up almost directly behind him, I was able to catch his trace perfectly and tell him before it even showed up on the screen, before we knew where that shot had landed, I told him exactly where that shot had landed because I was able to catch his trace when there were all these other guys around that couldn't figure it out, and the guy had already dropped 30 points. So, I know it's a long drawn-out story to get to that point, but that is a really important part of being able to catch bullet trace and catching bullet trace. And once you catch bullet trace and you start to see it, you can't not see it. I've had people watching me shoot, and they're like, man, I didn't see that trace. I'm saying, hey, if you watch, you'll see the bullet trace. And I'll shoot, and I'm knowing that it's there, and they're like, oh, I didn't see it. And then one of the third or fourth time, like, oh man, I saw that. I saw the perfect arc of the bullet. And I'm like, yeah, that's bullet trace. And then they don't ever unsee it after that. So that's if you have the spotting scope lined up behind the shooter and the bullet is remaining supersonic. So if you're shooting out to ELR distance, like the ELR shots that I do, it's not so pertinent for me to line up the spotting scope directly behind me as the shooter. First off, when I'm shooting beyond 2,000 yards, that angle, even if it's off a little bit one way or the other, gets really, really tight once you get out past 1,500 yards. But beyond that, I'm not worried about catching my trace because my bullets, when they get out past a mile, depending on what rifle I'm shooting, my 7 saw them out to about 1,900 yards. But they're not going to be supersonic, so I'm not worried about seeing that trace. I'm more worried about picking up an accurate idea of where that bullet splashes, so that if I need to go rewind my video, watch where that bullet splashed and make a decision off of that, I can. Because sometimes as the shooter, I'm not going to see that. And that's the whole point of a spotter, is to give accurate information to the shooter. Another thing, when you're setting up behind a shooter, you'll see a lot of people try to set up, and it makes sense, set up just as low as you can to the shooter. I used to do this with almost every video I did, and you would notice there was a lot of muzzle smoke that would would show up, a lot of dust that would kick up off the ground that would show up and really ruin the shot that I was trying to get of the trajectory of the bullet. So I started raising my spotting scope up about 1.5 feet or 2 foot off the top of the shooter and getting much clearer pictures without all that smoke. So that's another thing you have to think about, is setting yourself up so that you're not catching all the dust, the smoke that's actually going to interrupt the shooter from seeing what they want to see, so that you can see exactly the trajectory of that bullet, where it hit, where it splashed, so you can give the shooter an accurate call to the center of the target. And that's what we're trying to do as spotters. So this is just my rant on spotting scopes, setting up spotting scopes for success, because more often than not, when I see people spotting for other people, it's almost never in the proper way. So this is based on my experience, and especially catching bullet trace, reading shots for other people, as well as getting them for my videos. So hope this was helpful. Like I said, just my little rant on spotting scopes, how to set up your spotting scope for success. Hope the rain didn't bother you guys. I'll see you guys next time.